Hello, welcome to the first episode of Connecting with Kathleen. Our show aims to bring in local mental health and wellness professionals and agencies so that you can learn more about what's available in our community, who they serve, how to contact them, and their demographics. And today, I'm pleased to have Maggie Seldeen of High Rocky Harm Reduction. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you do, and first maybe explain what harm reduction is.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathleen, for having me this morning. And it's a big question, but I have big answers. So, like you said, I run High Rockies Harm Reduction. And so I think just talking about what harm reduction is a great place to start. And it's a pretty big concept. So in the broadest sense, harm reduction means reducing harm of the regular activities that we engage in, right? So we use harm reduction in a variety of ways throughout our daily life. Some of my favorite examples are with driving, particularly because driving is one of the most dangerous activities that anyone is going to engage in, but nobody's going to stop driving anytime soon. So that's why we have seatbelts and side view mirrors and speed limits and all of these things that we've developed over the century as we figure out how to keep people safe driving.
Awesome.
So we use harm reduction in a variety of, medical and public health ways as well. Face masks are harm reduction. Band-Aids are harm reduction. Helmets are harm reduction.
I was thinking, I ride my bike to work every day. I got that helmet on.
Exactly. Or maybe you're like me and you're super clumsy, so you're fully padded all the time, just to reduce the harm that is very likely to happen, right? And hopefully you never fall off your bike, but worst case scenario, we want your precious head protected.
Correct.
So when we talk about harm reduction in terms of substance use, that's kind of really the most common time we hear harm reduction, although we are starting to hear it more and more in its broadest sense. But traditionally, we are talking about harm reduction for people who use drugs and alcohol. And we are following evidence-based programs that have been shown to be very effective in the United States and across the globe. We've been running, there have been harm reduction programs for people who use drugs in the United States for over 30 years, and they've shown to be more effective at really connecting with people who use drugs and getting them into treatment. They say that people who engage with programs like High Rockies Harm Reduction are 3 to 5 times more likely to enter treatment than people who engage with the traditional recovery models, which are generally punitive and criminal justice oriented, right?
So the goal is to help people stop using?
So not necessarily. And so that's kind of where harm reduction really comes into play. Is the goal is not necessarily to get people to stop using, but to help them reduce that harm while they are actively using. So we kind of fill a niche and a safety net for people who are actively using and their affected friends and family members. And when I say that it's more likely to get people into treatment, that can mean a lot of things, right? It doesn't have to mean the standard 30 to 90 day stay in a treatment center. I think what's happening right now that we're seeing a lot of is people, especially people who are a little less affected by these issues, which is getting harder and harder to come by as well. Most people have a friend or family member that they can point to who has at least at some point had struggles with drugs or alcohol and mental health challenges. And so a lot of people are still kind of stuck in that thinking of 12-step programs and traditional rehabs, right? Which are great programs.
But there's more out there.
There's more out there, and those programs are not meeting the need. They're not working for everyone, right? And so it's funny because it's kind of like both. We aren't trying to get people into recovery inherently. We're really just there to build rapport with people who have been traditionally marginalized and discriminated against by traditional providers and have struggled to really access treatment for a variety of ways. That can be linguistic, economic, geographic, in our rural communities.
Well, yeah, in my experience as a therapist, people often so much shame.
Yes.
And they don't want to admit it, and they feel shamed by the community. And I'm like, no, we need to love these people. There's no shame in what you're doing. You didn't take your first hit and say, I want to be an addict. But yeah, I think there's so much need also for family members. Can they come to you?
Yeah, so many things I want to say to that because I love what you just said because so many times people want to blame and put the shame and say, this is a choice you made. nobody really chooses this
Exactly.
lifestyle. Nobody wants to, I mean, honestly, some people maybe do, but nobody really wants to have these struggles with addiction. And I wasn't necessarily planning on talking about this a lot, but you know, I have a lot of personal experience. I grew up in the Roaring Fork Valley. I grew up in bars and restaurants, and I know firsthand, and I had a really hard time in school, and I know firsthand that, you know, when people are telling you you're screwing up and telling you you're the problem, that's all the more reason to use, to disassociate, and you kind of like start believing what people are telling you, that you're worthless and there's no chance, and so you might as well use. But what we do is build this, you know, space where there's unconditional, non-judgmental love and support. And it really it gives me goosebumps, because to have that is life-changing.
Right. That human connection that they don't get, which I think is so important, is I don't care what you're doing, you're a human being. Let's connect. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, and every human, you know, needs and deserves love and access to the appropriate care. And to your point, family members, I believe, are a largely overlooked constituency. And so we're not the only ones. We partner with a lot of other amazing community organizations, but really providing services that are tailored for family members. And we do provide some evidence-based programming for family members that has been proven to, again, be more likely to get that affected loved one into some form of treatment. And it's beautiful to me how this works, because it's really all about communication and self-care. And before, it was always this kind of like seesaw battle of tough love and enabling, and those were kind of the two sides of the coin. And like, where do we meet in the middle? And I could really start crying if I think about it too hard, because I'm also a family member of affected individuals, and when you're living with that actively, it is so hard, and it is so demoralizing, and just feels very impossible. And so learning how to take care of yourself through that, and the science of how that benefit, like there's like a trickle down benefit, is super cool to me.
Awesome. So speak a little bit about, you have some programs that you do. I'd love to hear more about those.
Yeah. So High Rockies Harm Reduction was founded in November of 2020 here in the Valley. And it's been like, again, like a little bit of a seesaw up and down, but we're really excited that now we have some substantial longer term funding to allow us to do mobile harm reduction services in 5 counties. So I always tell people, go to highRockiesHarmReduction.com or follow us on Instagram and Facebook to keep up to date on our service schedule, because it is kind of changing. And we'll be changing it a little bit in the fall. We'll probably be doing some earlier hours. But right now we are working in Aspen, Basalt, Carbondale, Eagle, Edwards, Frisco, Breckenridge, and Leadville.
It's a large area.
It is a large area. So right now it's just once a month. And again, our full schedule is up. We're trying to get these to once a week in 2025. But right now we basically post up. We have a mobile service unit. So we're at different locations and providing whatever services we really can. If we don't have something that somebody wants, we can look into ordering it, but we give out free Narcan, free fentanyl test strips. We are a full syringe service program, so that means sterile syringes and syringe disposal. So we also work a lot on educating our folks on how to keep themselves safe and clean, how to keep our community safe and clean, even if people are using. And I was telling you a little bit before we started that one of my favorite things that we do is safe snorting kits, because that's a little more relevant to our communities. And all the safe use equipment is really to keep people out of the ER and to stop the spread of disease, to stop wounds from getting more than they have to be, which is hard to in our new climate with xylazine. So working on, you know, drug checking options as well as wound care options. And a lot of time people don't realize that, you know, if you are a regular drug user, if you're smoking drugs, if you're snorting drugs, there's very often going to be cuts in your mouth and nose. So if you're sharing pipes or straws or whatever,
sharing disease possibly.
We can be sharing disease. And I hear this a lot actually on the streets, that like a very common harm reduction technique for folks is if you are snorting drugs and you're using like a bill, to use $100 bill instead of a $1 bill, because they have less, like they circulate less, so there's less grossness, because like a $1 bill is also like disgusting.
Touched so many hands, and
just so much grossness. So we give out like clean straws and stuff, and really just try to encourage folks and start having those conversations about what safe use and healthy use
Right.
looks like. And, it's interesting to me because the work is somewhat controversial,
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
but because people, we want to work to reduce the negative consequences of substance use, right?
Right.
Which is in our mission statement. And sometimes people don't understand how our work really aligns with that, because we're not necessarily pushing people to quit using drugs. But my belief is that by not pushing people, we actually create more of a space
Right.
that allows them to do that. But there's some really interesting scientific data out there that says that most people who use drugs don't have addiction problems. And I think we see a lot more drug use and partying in our
Right.
resort communities and in our restaurant and service communities. And so the reality is that some people might not be smoking meth every night, but maybe they're using cocaine every weekend, or maybe they're using it once a month, or at the opera parties, or whatever the case may be. And so one of the biggest issues that we're seeing nationally right now is, people don't deserve to die from one accidental exposure.
Right.
And fentanyl is making that a much more serious issue. And then we see other things like carfentanil and xylazine. The drug landscape is always changing, and when it's a legal black market, we can never really know
never
what's
know.
in it.
Right.
But a lot of folks who are out there using drugs aren't necessarily regular or daily users.
No, and I don't think most people, especially if they're not regular users, are thinking about the potential harm of using a dirty bill or a dirty needle. They don't. I think in general, the public's like, what do you mean harm reduction? We just want them to stop. Like, no, they're going to use. Let's keep them safe.
And that's been kind of my mantra my entire life. I grew up in a home where these conversations were very normalized, and that's not the best thing for a kid, but I'm super grateful because I've wanted to be a health educator since I was a little girl, with the reality that people are going to have sex and they're going to use drugs. These are like things humans and mammals
Right.
have been doing forever.
Yes.
And really, when it does become a problem, when we see folks with addiction issues, that's because they have underlying
Issues,
mental health
yes,
issues,
absolutely.
right? And it's the trauma or the neurodivergence or the untreated or undertreated or undiagnosed, whatever, right? And
Right.
these are the folks who are at risk where it develops into addiction.
Correct.
And providing that education too. And, this is like way down the road, the way things move. But in a perfect world, like, I'd like to see us talking in schools about what these drugs actually do to our bodies. Because if we knew the difference between cocaine and fentanyl and methamphetamine, we would be able to have a better
A
understanding.
wiser choice. Yeah, exactly.
And there's this fear, like, if we talk about it, people are going to do it. Especially with young people, like, if we don't talk about it, then they're going to have to go find out for themselves.
Right. In a very poor way, in a potentially life-threatening way.
And that's what's so scary right now, is kids experiment, young people experiment, and that's, again, kind of a normal part of life. And it's interesting how, I'm a sociologist and a psychologist by nature, and so it's really interesting to me how the, space in life that is defined as adolescence is relatively new, and it's expanding, and it's longer. But then what people are kind of doing with that is changing all the time too. And so it used to be very culturally normal for people to experiment with drugs and alcohol, and I think it still is. And in communities like ours, like Aspen, like Vail, like Breckenridge, it's normal to use cocaine, it's normal to drink alcohol, it's normal to use cannabis, and it's normal to use prescription drugs like opioids and benzodiazepines, or anti-anxiety medications like Valium. So we can expect kids to experiment with all this, but it's not safe the way it used to be, and we kind of, there have always been issues with contamination, but now, like, the risk is so great. Such a small amount of fentanyl can kill you, and it can be so easily disguised in any other drug that it's like.
Can you speak about fentanyl a little bit and describe what it is, how it's getting into everything, and why it's such a huge danger?
Yeah, and so it's complicated. Drug science is always confusing me, but fentanyl is a very strong opioid. It is very commonly used in medicine, and this is where I think we get really confused, because our country does, like, we kind of have a little bite of every kind of drug policy, where we do have some medicalization, we do have some decriminalization, and then we still have criminalization of street drugs, right? So fentanyl is a very strong and fast-acting opioid. And so they're able to use very small amounts of it in a very safe way in like acute care in hospitals. So for surgeries and labor and things like that. And because we have naloxone, they're able to like remove it from your system really quickly and safely. So in that structured environment, fentanyl is a huge
Lifesaver.
benefit.
Yeah.
And we're constantly like, heroin was a drug that we used in hospitals. And then we synthesized it and developed these other drugs like oxycodone and all that. The problem that happened was saying that oxycodone was safe, non-lethal, non-habit forming. It's not that. It's not. One of my issues as a pain patient and a psychiatric patient is that it's not dealing with the root causes of our symptoms. It's masking the symptoms, right? So that's always a struggle. But when we talk about illicit fentanyl, right, like this is the problem that we're seeing. And COVID did play a huge role in this. This has been happening for a long time. Traditionally in like the opioid using world, people would die from what we called hot shots, meaning there was a contamination. We don't know what it was, but there was something in the drug that was unknown to them, and it was a different strength than they thought or whatever. And so we really started seeing this like becoming a bigger and bigger national issue around 2014. I know I lost somebody very close to me here in the Valley. They used contaminated heroin that had fentanyl in it, and they passed away. At the same time, Philip Seymour Hoffman died from like a similar thing. So we started seeing it locally on the personal level and nationally on this larger scale. And since then, it's really gotten exacerbated. But during COVID, imports and exports globally were upset, and folks started manufacturing fentanyl on a larger scale because the realization was, wow, it's a lot easier and cheaper to make this really strong drug in a laboratory than it is to grow and harvest opium plants that takes a season and all this labor. And then fentanyl is very strong, so it can be, and it's developed as a white powder, so it can very easily disguise itself in other drugs. Part of what they say that they're using it in drugs like heroin or cocaine, it's like they can kind of mess, and I'm not the chemist, I'm the sociologist, but they can kind of mess with the psychoactive properties depending on how much they add to what, right? And so there's actually a lot of debates of how this is happening, because a lot of people think like, oh, drug killers don't want to necessarily kill their clientele. So a lot of people believe because it is such a small amount that can contaminate, that it is like cross-contamination through scales, the same way like nothing in a restaurant is really gluten-free because there's still flour everywhere. That's kind of the same thing we're dealing with. But also, through the past few years, like you can just, get a lot more bang for your buck from fentanyl. Such a small amount goes such a further way. And if you have used opioids before, or you use opioids, a small amount of fentanyl may not kill you. But if you've never used an opioid before and you think you're using cocaine, or what we've seen a lot, which is really terrifying, young people who think they're taking an opioid or a Valium, which is
in a pill form.
Exactly, and should be a safe dose, right? But what we're seeing now is like if you are getting a pill from anywhere else other than like your pharmacist with your name on it, like people are ordering pills online, people are getting pills all over. And again, a problem in the past couple of years is we've had shortages of a lot of our medications. So one of my favorite things I saw was, we have an Adderall shortage and a fentanyl surplus. So this is what we're going to get. So to summarize, very strong white powder. They say if you've never used an opioid before, the amount of fentanyl that can kill you can fit on the tip of a pencil. Wow. So, and we do provide the fentanyl testing strips at High Rockies Harm Reduction, and we are working on getting kind of more comprehensive drug checking programs. We have a lot of big proponents, and this is what our constituents really want to see. They want to know what's in their drugs. Because also, great if it's not fentanyl, but what is it? There are other things out there. We are now dealing with this drug xylazine that's also contaminating, and that is a tranquilizer. So Narcan doesn't work on it the way that Narcan works on fentanyl. And the test strips are hard to use, and then really like because of how small of an amount it takes to kill you, if you test a part of a pill or a part of a bag, like you should be consuming what you tested. and testing every time because we really don't know. So we're working on getting better technology, but that's why I always say, like, always carry Narcan because that's the
So
real
if you
antidote.
test with a test strip, is it 100% effective?
No, not at all.
Okay. So there's no guarantee.
No. And
That's
there's
terrifying.
I know, and there's confusion because I think a lot of people like hear about this and are like, "Oh, it's a option," but the way that the fentanyl test strips work is actually rather complicated because they're designed to test urine. They're not designed to test drugs.
Okay.
So they've been kind of repurposed for this. So in order to use them, you have to dilute your drugs with water. One of the bigger issues too is that it's a different amount of water that you use for different drugs, and people often don't know that.
That's very complicated.
It's already too complicated,
Right.
right? And you need more water to test MDMA and meth than you do cocaine, but our cocaine is also commonly cross-contaminated with meth. So it's hard to even know how much water you should use. And then if you have a negative, like, that's really not a guarantee. So they're unfortunately very complicated.
You know, it's kind of frightening to think of, some of my clients who, when they need a fix, they need a fix. I don't know they're going to stop, and I need this much water, I got to dilute it. I'm not going to wait.
Yeah, and we've seen that with people who are regular or daily users, they can kind of, especially if they are using opioids, pills, or otherwise, they can kind of assume that it is fentanyl, and we've kind of gotten to this point where that's really all that's available. And so our best harm reduction advice is take the smallest amount you can. There's actually a national hotline that you can call if you're using alone called Never Use Alone. So you can go to neverusealone.com.
Love it.
And they have an English and a Spanish hotline, and we actually have that information on our brochures as well. In a perfect world, people have kind of like a designated driver type person that can sit with them and administer Narcan if needed. But the reality is most people
Don't.
And there's a lot of shame around use, right?
Right.
So there are other resources, but really, like, I kind of won't give people test strips without Narcan, because what if the test strips don't work? And it's just, it's very scary.
Well, speak to Narcan a little bit, because I think a lot of people are afraid to administer it because they think if somebody took fentanyl and they touched them, they're going to die too.
Right. And that's another hard one because, we've kind of generally myth busted that. But then I still hear stories where it's kind of like with everything, it's hard to really know. But our understanding is, like, the science is you can't consume a powder by just touching it, right?
Correct.
Like if you had a cut or if your hands were wet or something like that. But truly, like, it's not chemically possible to touch a drug. And so we also know that the risk for being contaminated by providing first response to somebody is, like, little to none.
I think that needs to get out there. People need to know.
Yeah, and I think people are just scared in general. Providing first aid is not everyone's wheelhouse, and people don't always know what to do. And so even knowing that a drug exists, we've been doing a lot of work on this because so my mom passed away from a heroin overdose in 2006 because we did not know to call 911. We did not know that this drug existed. And it's been around for a long time. Paramedics and first responders have had it in the Valley for a long time. And so even if you're not comfortable, like, calling 911, and there are laws that exist that protect you
Correct.
and the person who's overdosed.
It's so important to say you're not going to have a criminal charge if you call.
Yeah, you're not going to get in trouble. And the same is true if you decide to give Narcan. Narcan is safe, it's easy to use, and it's totally legal. And, like, every year for the past 5 years, they've been adding to that. So now even EMS can use it if it's expired. It doesn't matter if it's been in your car for 5 years. It doesn't matter what the brand name is. The generic drug is called naloxone, and Narcan is a common brand, but there are others out there. We also still carry an intramuscular version, but Narcan is an intranasal, super easy to use, and a lot of places have it. So Garfield County Libraries are now a distribution site. More public health departments are giving it away for free. We obviously give it away for free, and you can get it from any pharmacy. It's over the counter, so most insurances still cover it, and it's, I think, $40 if you don't have insurance. So anyone
And
can
also the
access
Ashland
and
Police
use.
Department will hand it out for free.
Great, yeah, and I work in a lot of counties, and I can never keep it straight because a lot of our public health and sheriff's departments are giving these supplies out. So thank you for that reminder. And it's safe and easy to use, and even if it's expired, still good. And if somebody's not having an opioid overdose, it won't do
no harm.
anything.
Yeah, I understand too, for some people who are administered Narcan, when they come to, they are at immediate withdrawal. They're not very happy people.
Yeah.
But know that you saved their life, even though they may be very angry with you.
Yeah, and that is, the biggest side effect
Right.
is that if you are dependent on opioids, you will go into withdrawal. And so that's also, we like to give people the smallest dose possible and add as necessary. But at the end of the day, people might not be happy that you called 911 or that you gave them Narcan. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, it is better to save a life.
Yes.
It is better to lose a friendship than to lose a friend.
Forever. That's correct.
And I would rather do 2 years in jail than lose another friend. Not that that's going to happen, but
Especially in this county, we're very reassured by our sheriffs and police officers. Call. We just want to help people and want to get them to the right services. Don't hesitate.
yeah, we're really lucky here, and we work really closely with our law enforcement and our public health departments.
Right.
And I can't speak to everywhere in the state or everywhere in the country, but I do tell folks, and if you do get harassed by the police for having Narcan, or if you get cited for something like this, call me, because we can work on that and
Right.
try to get it taken care of before it ever sees the courtroom.
Well, Maggie, I want to thank you for coming today, the first episode, and you have so much wealth of knowledge. And if people want to contact you, they would go to, what's your webpage?
Hi Rockies, harmreduction.com. All my contact info is up there. You can email me, and you can also follow at Hi Rockies Harm Reduction on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much for having
All
me,
right.
Kathleen.
Thank you so much for being here, I guess I should say. And thank you guys for tuning in today, and hope to see you in future episodes. And I want to wish you health, healing, and happiness.